So this is AP. We're discussing the short story 11 and how to analyze it. And I was just saying that I've learned that the basic skills that we're learning are good anywhere. So like two things that are pretty neutral. They're not biased toward poetry. Maybe similes, figurative language, imagery. Maybe that's more biased. That's not the right word, but you know they lean. The poets use that more. But he has or she uses non-similes in there. There's at least one symbol and at least one metaphor. So this is prose. This is a prose writer, a narrative short story writer who's using the techniques of poetry. But you can also apply the diction and the syntax and analyzing this girl. Remember I told you the other day, how do you, when it says discuss the literary techniques used to characterize Rachel, and the word characterize threw me the first time because that's not a word that I've used much. And so what does that mean? Well, how does an author reveal a character to its readers? How does he do that? Finley, what techniques, what you're reading a story, you're not reading an essay where he tells you one thing or the other, you're reading a story. So how do you learn the character? How do you learn about the character?
Through what the character says,
Right.
what other characters say to that character, how the character acts,
Good.
how other people react to those actions,
Good.
how they're viewed by other people, and then the way they use their language, their diction, and their syntax.
Great. That's it. And I mean, we went over that, but that's the answer to the question. This is what the author uses to let that person, to create that person for you, that character. So that's what you have to analyze. So with that in mind, Madison, would you get us started? Tell us something about the techniques used and what we learn from those techniques about the character.
Well, the poem was kind of like really straightforward and a low diction, and I kind of took that as like it kind of like shows that she's like younger because it's kind of just straightforward words and like the.
Of course, we know exactly how old she is.
11. And
But what are you saying when you say she's younger? What do you mean by that?
Well, she's not using very big words, I guess. And
You think their words appropriate for an 11-year-old? So what you're telling me is that he's done a really good, or she has done a really good job creating what an 11-year-old would be like. And of course, if you didn't know she was 11, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint a particular date. But so her language or the diction, the diction.
Feels a little bit advanced though, for an 11-year-old. Some of the
Of course, yes.
diction.
And the ideas are certainly advanced.
Yeah,
And of course,
concepts are not something I would think exactly that 11-year-old would be talking about. But then it kind of works well because it intersperses with these very kind of childlike things. That,
Right.
Like especially what did for me was that these long lists of like this and this and
Yeah.
this and this and this seems very childlike, and it helps kind of distract, I would say, from the higher concepts.
well, I mean, ideally, you would want those things to contribute instead of subtract
not
from.
distract from them necessarily, but distract from the fact that the concept isn't necessarily an 11-year-old's concept.
Okay, it makes it more palatable, it makes it more,
Palatable,
yeah, it makes it more believable that it's this little complex idea is spoken in the words of a 11-year-old. Good, yeah.
I think like the way she describes other people kind of characterizes her as being kind of an overthinker and also kind of self-conscious. Because when she mentions Sylvia Saldivar,
I would say that again when she mentions what?
when she mentions Sylvia Saldivar,
Yeah.
she's like, maybe she doesn't like me because I'm too skinny, and then she says she's like, but she's stupid. So it shows that she's like self-conscious about herself, but also judgmental of others, which is very much like a childish way to act.
Yeah, and you see how that's, what you're doing is you're talking about diction. You're talking about her diction, the speaker's diction. Finley mentioned that. And words, the way she describes that, that's really good. That does reveal something about her, that she's a kid and everything's black or white, everything's right or wrong, you know, there's very little subtleties, very few subtleties in between, yeah.
She like expresses or explains like her feelings through things that she's already experienced. Like, because she's only 11, when she gets a headache, she can only explain how it hurts or how it feels through when she drinks her milk too fast, which is like if you drink a slushy too fast, you get a brain freeze, but she's not gonna say brain freeze, she's just going to like explain her feelings through her experiences.
That's really good, and I think I'm convinced that you don't need to see that, that's not helping us any, so I just need more space. That is really an important point, what you just said, and you mentioned milk, didn't you?
Yes.
Can you think of other things that that clearly express her world? You know, going back to what Finley said, the author never lets us forget that she's young. If she sounded like Ms. Cisneros, who was an adult writer, it would lose all its appeal. But she never lets us forget that she's just 10 or 11 now.
She also says that like her body was shaking, which was the feeling of nervousness, which she probably doesn't even know that word, so she calls it like, she says like when you have hiccups. And so that's another way that she describes her feeling.
And she uses the word like a lot, which
Yeah,
is,
it's using-
technically is a simile, but something kids might use.
So it's using like more simplified language to describe more complex concepts.
Which is your distraction.
Which is, yeah, it distracts from the complexity of the concept, it makes you think more like she is 11.
Yeah.
Yes.
You see that, that's the art of the writer, you know, being able to Huffman did the same thing. He talked about slavery and violence and all this stuff, but from a 14-year-old eyes, yeah. Yeah. How about it, Max?
Maybe like we see how like other people interact with her, or like kind of indicative of like her age, like how the teacher treats her, like how she pretty much is showing that like that the teacher's just right, and even like
The teacher what?
the teacher's always right, if like Rachel tries to speak up, like the teacher just tells her that it is hers.
Teachers are always right.
Not
You're not
always.
gonna disagree with him, are you?
Most of the time, yeah, but not always.
Keep going, keep going.
Yeah, that's all you got.
It's a good point.
In fact, we can make a really good point that this teacher,
She doesn't seem like a great teacher.
she's made some really big errors in this story, so definitely she's not always right, and of course that's what she's been taught, and I appreciate that, you know, respect for authority, but we know from experience, it doesn't mean that it's true, but it shows a respect.
Just
How
because
about
they're the authority doesn't mean they're right.
exactly, Kyle?
So she talks about like when you're like younger, like how you act.
Wait a minute, say that again.
She talks about like how like she says something about what is it like when you're 3, like crying
Oh, yeah,
like you're 3.
yeah.
And so I just thought it was funny how she talks about like being more immature when you're younger, even though she's 11. And she thinks like she's older than she actually is, I think. And like she has some sense of maturity, but like at the same time, she thinks she's like an adult, but she's actually.
Where is she mature? Because we've pointed out she's childish in her experiences and the way she describes others, in the language she uses for all of that. So where is she mature? I agree that she probably is. We talked about her ideas are pretty complex. What's complex about any of that? Give me something complex.
I think the fact that she's able to see like that you act differently when you're younger versus older shows maturity in and of itself. That like
Alright.
she knows that she shouldn't be acting like she was when she was 3 and 4. and
She
stuff.
cries like a 3-year-old. She wishes she were 102, then you would know what to say, yeah.
I think it also goes back to when she like wishes that she was 102, like that's kind of showing her maturity because she's wanting wisdom to understand how to like deal with this concept of, or like this interaction that she's having. She thinks that when she's older, she would have more experience and more wisdom to deal with it, but that's such a complex idea for an 11-year-old to say, I wish I had more wisdom to understand this, but she just puts it with an age.
Good.
She's
Yeah, which is kind of a silly age to pick,
Yeah.
but that helps us remember she's a child, and she thinks 102, like, that's kind of off the charts age. John?
Well, at the end, when she's like crying, there's a bunch of like imagery to it. Like it says, it compares to like little animal noises.
Right.
The author's using imagery here, and then it says like, my body's shaking like when you have the hiccups, and
Right?
it hurts like I'm drinking milk. So the author's using like, I guess comparisons, or,
And this, we call, there's similes, right?
so I guess, could it be imagery?
Oh, yeah, similes, I mean, imageries are created through similes, they're created through figurative language. Any of those things create pictures. You mentioned, I just turned to another one, the sweater smelled like cottage cheese. All these things, or common, ordinary things that she's been aware of. Yeah, somebody else had okay, how about Julia?
She uses a lot of like repetition or like
Yes.
girl back to like certain ideas. So like
Wait a minute,
she-
say that again?
like like referring back to like the same thing because she keeps repeating not mine, not mine, not mine.
Right.
And it really shows her like anxiety, her worry, because like when you have anxiety, there's like this one thing that like sticks out to you, and for her, it's the sweater and like having it on her desk.
Yeah.
So like she's like kind of obsessing over it, but like yeah.
One thing that's also consistent, guys, try to pay attention to what we're doing here. One thing that's consistent with her is the inability to express what's on her mind. And I think I've told you that before. I think one of the saddest things, that's why I didn't know it at the time, but I realized one of my roles as a teacher of literature and writing is to overcome that problem. Because you guys, you don't want to have an idea and you don't know how to say it. I've heard students say that. I know what I want to say, I just don't know how to say it. Isn't that a really sad position to be in? That's her. She knows what she wants to say, or she knows what she wishes she could say, but she can't say it. All she can do is repeat herself. It's not mine, not mine, not mine. Have you ever been in a situation where something was said or done and it required from you, or it would have been great if you had a great response, a retort of some kind, and you just had nothing, and then 2 days later, 24 hours later, oh gosh, that would have been great if I had just said that. And of course, you can't undo the situation. Have anybody ever watched Seinfeld? There's a Seinfeld episode where he gets humiliated in a meeting, George, and he spends the next week trying to come up with a new what he should have said. So he spends the rest of the episode trying to recreate the moment. Like, he had to be in a similar situation with these same people, with this same guy who humiliated him, so he could say his remarks. So he spends a week trying to arrange this thing, and so he does, and he thinks he's so proud of himself, and he comes up with this witty response, and then the guy beats him again by coming up something else that he didn't think of. That's the human nature. We want to be able to express what we're thinking. Tyler, anything? Let's review. Diction. We've made some points there. The language, the diction, the complex ideas. No one's really mentioned those ideas. The fact that she wants wisdom, that's kind of a mature thing. And I think Davis pointed out how others interact with her, what they say to her, but I don't have any examples. A lot of repetition, that's a childlike thing. And I like, again, the fact that all of her examples come from her experience. They reinforce the idea that she's a child or a kid, yeah.
When she says like, I can't stop the little animals.
Right.
Coming out.
Right, yep. Yeah, okay, anything else? Thank you.
A bit of maturity, it's again, a little bit of maturity, she realizes what's going on with her.
She's able to
She's
describe it.
trying, she's able to describe it, but then again, she's also in that situation in the first place.
And remember, the dilemma for the writer, who is an adult woman, is trying to recreate the experiences of an 11-year-old girl, and she's done you've expressed that she's done a pretty good job. It makes you feel like she nailed it. A couple of last things here. What about those ideas? What about the idea of life being all those things all at once? You're 3, 4, 5, 6, all together, and it's like rings inside a tree trunk, or onion, or wooden dolls that stack within each other. I mean, that's pretty clever for an 11-year-old. Of course, the writer is not 11, but he creates that complex idea that we're kind of layers of personality and emotions that you never lose. You just tack on to it. That's kind of complex. That would need to be said. Like I said, 9 or 10 similes. Oh yeah, what is the idea? How do people treat her? That was something I think you said, or that was one of the things you look for, is how she's treated. So how is she treated by other people?
I mean, the teacher clearly like shut her down when she was trying to express that it wasn't hers, and just like put it on, like stop whining about it. And so like it obviously shows that the teacher thinks she's immature and still young.
Right.
So it just adds.
And does the teacher apologize?
No.
No.
The teacher pulled the good old, I'm older and I'm in a position of authority, therefore I'm right no matter what you say card.
And it's like Huck. Huck thinks slavery is right, and yet his experience tells him it's wrong. She's been taught the adult is always right, and yet this experience tells me that's not true in this particular instance. What is the main idea here? Nick, you want to jump in there? What is the theme? What is the meaning? What is the truth that the author was trying to get across?
That no matter what age you are, there's always gonna be somebody who has authority over you.
Yes, and can you take that further? What's going to be the result of that experience? And
Well, like, it helps her realize that, like, when someone's in charge, sometimes you just have to, like, listen to what they say and then ignore it later, or just, like, pretend you're doing what you do.
that's a good point.
And just move on, so that they'll leave you alone with that.
Yeah,
If you don't make a deal about it, they won't make a deal about it.
those are all good points. Yeah, Kayla.
I was gonna say that like the meaning's kind of, to me, it feels more like no matter what age you are, because even the teacher herself is immature. There's always gonna be some immaturity to
All right,
you.
very good.
You're gonna be able to relay on past experiences.
Yeah, the term that we used last period was, you used the word immaturity to mean what they meant when they said injustice. This is a story about injustice. What happens when you're treated unjustly, or they use the word unfairly? All of us have been in that, and there's nothing you can do about it. You don't get an apology. The whole thing is fraught with injustice, and there's no recourse. You know, there's no way for her to undo it at all. She has to just take it, which is what I think you were saying. You know, she has to accept the authority. She can't do anything about it, and it changes her in some way. The world is unjust, and a lot of times I can't change it. I gotta just live with it.
She realizes the true unfairness. of
Yes, that is a very important moment in one's life when something bad happened, you realize, I'm just a kid, I can't do anything about it. And that's why it's so sad for, you know, bad things that happen to children, because they literally have no way to do anything about it. Adults, at least you have kind of a fighting chance. You're on the same level with the other adult. But, very good. Anybody having, what does the sweater represent? Like, I think the sweater becomes a symbol. It's a metaphor. It's a big red mountain, but it's also a symbol. You know the difference is? This has always helped me, and sometimes you don't worry about it. You know, in other words, if you call it a symbol and it's really a metaphor, I wouldn't worry too much about it. A metaphor is, you have a real thing being compared to something that's imaginary.
Like an idea or something.
Like in this case, it's a real sweater, and it's being compared to a mountain. Now, mountains, there are no mountains in the story. There's not a mountain in the story. But you're thinking of a mountain that reminds you of the sweater and vice versa. A symbol is something like the Mississippi River, which is in the story. It actually serves a function in the story, but it also symbolizes or means lots of things like freedom and movement and the unexpected and all that. That is the difference, okay? If in this case, there's no waterfall All these things are just imaginary, but she's using them to compare. Well, good job. What I'd like to finish up with is something you have with you, and I would like you to get the ballad out, the ballad of,
Ode to Billy Joe.
Ode to Billy Joe. And there's a packet there. All right, so we did this, yeah,
Oh, it's my locker.
yeah, go get it, please. I don't know why this wouldn't be in your notebook, it's thin and. Try to put it in your notebook, it's not like an extra thing you gotta carry, I gotta carry that sheet of paper around with me all day. So I always leave it in my locker, because it's just too much trouble.
Well, I mean, Mr. Powell, it's just one sheet of paper and another sheet of paper and another sheet of paper.
It's not just one sheet of paper,
Until.
this
you're,
is the last straw,
Alright,
right?
yeah, until your entire backpack weighs
I get you.
20, 30
It's just
pounds.
one won't fit after the other.
Just one more paper.
Yeah. Where you going, Ethan, just walking out?
Yeah, well, I left my whole binder in my locker.
Why would you bring your literature
Just
book
go
to
get
your
it.
literature class?
Go get it, don't explain it, just go get it.
Don't even try, Ethan.
I don't think
I'll find it.
Yeah, I don't know what mine is either. You're looking
Hi, learner.
All right, so I want you to turn to the poem on the back side of the Ode to Billy Joe. We have 10 minutes, you can probably do this in 10 minutes. It's called Upton Wood, and it is a ballad, you'll see, you can close that.
Oh, Kayla's right behind me.
Okay. All right, so turn to Ode, Upton Wood, and this fits pretty much all of this, all right? I want you to, no questions, I want you to mark it. I want you to go through it like we've done all year and notice the diction, the syntax, the similes, the metaphors, the imagery, the repetition. Oh, by the way, you were saying this a minute, weren't you saying this, Nick, about the and? Didn't you say, or was that somebody else?
That was me. Sorry about those
Sorry.
listening commands.
We use the word, what do you call lots of and?
Because of the weather today, all practices have been canceled. Yes, all practices have been canceled.
All right, what do you call it with all and? Listen to this, guys. If you know what it is, use it in your paper. If you don't call it that, they're probably not gonna count off, but if you do use it, they'll give you credit for it. Like this person knows this word, I was impressed. So polysyndeton, instead of asyndeton, which means none of those things, mainly you have usually punctuation. So mark it, read it, you got 10 minutes. You can do it in 10 minutes.
Mr. Powell.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. I just switched out my binders and I realized I just got the wrong binder. I'm really sorry.
Yep. You can waste more time.
I'm
Go
sorry,
get it.
Mr. Powell.
Go right ahead. Shh, hey guys, just why don't you mind your business, not his? That would be great for a change. Mind your own business.